The familiar story of the Dutch tulip boom is often told as a cautionary tale about greed, a moment of collective madness, a market that lost its senses over flowers. That framing is comforting. It suggests irrationality. It suggests exception. What it misses is structure. By the time tulip speculation emerged, the Dutch Republic was already wealthy. Trade networks were mature, finance was sophisticated, capital was abundant. The economy had moved beyond survival and into optimization. Tulips did not create speculation. Speculation found tulips. At first, bulbs were a luxury good, rare, difficult to cultivate, status symbols for the already prosperous. Their value was anchored loosely to scarcity and craftsmanship. But scarcity alone does not create a bubble. What matters is how value is traded. As contracts developed, tulips began to circulate not as flowers, but as claims. Ownership became abstract. Futures were exchanged. Paper moved faster than bulbs ever could. Value detached from use and attached itself to expectation. This is the critical shift. Production remained slow, biological, seasonal, but prices were no longer bound to growth cycles. They responded to demand, not output. And demand was fueled by liquidity, not consumption. Tulips became financial instruments. The system did not collapse because people wanted flowers. It destabilized because the economy discovered it could generate returns without expanding production. Capital learned it could earn by circulating among itself. This was not unique to tulips. Tulips were simply convenient. The Dutch system had already mastered trade, shipping, insurance, and credit. Tulips fit neatly into an existing financial architecture. Contracts were enforceable, trust was high, markets were deep, speculation was not a deviation, it was an extension. This is why the boom spread quietly. It did not look dangerous, it looked sophisticated. Ordinary settings absorbed it: taverns, homes, informal gatherings. Finance diffused into daily life. No violence, no panic, just rising prices. The deeper transformation was psychological. Value was no longer associated primarily with making or moving goods. It was associated with positioning. Getting in early, holding claims, transferring risk. Tulips revealed something new. An economy could feel prosperous, even as production stood still. Wealth could multiply on paper without expanding the underlying system. Confidence could substitute for output, temporarily. This was not a failure of morality. It was a discovery of incentives. Once capital realizes it can grow faster than the economy beneath it, pressure builds. Not to invest in production, but to stay liquid, to trade, to speculate. Tulips were not irrational. They were efficient within a system that rewarded circulation over creation. That system did not collapse immediately. It simply revealed a vulnerability. When value becomes detached from structure, stability depends entirely on belief. And belief, unlike production, does not compound forever. As speculation intensified, a second transformation occurred. Risk moved. Originally, risk lived with producers. Growers faced uncertainty. Weather, disease, time, profit followed patience, loss followed failure. Tulip contracts redistributed that risk. But not evenly. Risk shifted outward. Contracts allowed traders to profit without cultivating. Buyers could commit future money. Sellers could lock in prices before production. The system rewarded participation, not contribution. This widened the gap between finance and labor. Tulip growers remained bound to biological limits. Traders were bound only to liquidity and trust. As prices rose, the incentive to produce diminished relative to the incentive to trade. The economy tilted. More capital chased claims. Fewer resources expanded capacity. The system did not run out of tulips. It ran out of anchors. This is how bubbles form structurally. Not through excess desire, but through misaligned incentives. When returns depend on price movement rather than output, capital flows away from production. Growth becomes circular. At this stage, collapse is not necessary. Fragility is enough. The system becomes sensitive to confidence. Any disruption, legal, social, or psychological, can halt circulation. When circulation stops, prices lose reference points. Tulips did not become worthless overnight. They became illiquid. And illiquidity exposes structure. When contracts could no longer be honored at expected prices, trust fractured, not violently, quietly. Participants withdrew. Transactions slowed. Prices fell back toward production value. What followed was not universal ruin. The Dutch economy survived. Trade continued. Institutions remained. But the episode left a lesson embedded in the system. Speculation had limits, not moral limits, structural ones. The tulip boom demonstrated that finance could outrun the economy it rested on, but only temporarily. Without continuous belief, detached value collapses back into use value. This pattern would reappear, not always with flowers, sometimes with land, sometimes with shares, sometimes with abstract instruments disconnected from tangible output. The lesson was not forgotten. It was normalized. Financial systems evolved safeguards, regulations, clearing mechanisms, central coordination, not to eliminate speculation, but to manage its consequences. Tulips were an early rehearsal. They showed that economies can feel wealthy while becoming hollow. That price signals can lose meaning when they no longer reflect production. That confidence, once broken, is difficult to restore. Most importantly, they revealed that speculation is not a flaw. It is a phase that emerges when capital accumulates faster than productive opportunities, when finance seeks returns where structure cannot support them. The tulip boom was not an anomaly. It was a preview. The relevance of the tulip boom is not botanical. It is structural. What mattered was not the flower, but the conditions that allowed a simple object to become a vehicle for abstract value. By the time tulips became speculative, the Dutch economy had already reached maturity. Capital was plentiful. Institutions were trusted. Trade networks were global. The system had more money than immediately productive uses for it. This is where speculation emerges naturally. When productive capacity cannot expand quickly enough to absorb accumulated capital, value seeks motion elsewhere. Finance accelerates. Claims multiply. Prices begin to reflect expectation rather than output. Growth becomes circular, feeding on confidence rather than production. This is not a failure of judgment. It is a consequence of incentives. The tulip boom revealed that an economy can feel prosperous while becoming structurally fragile. Markets can rise even as the productive base remains unchanged. Wealth can appear abundant even when nothing new is being built. What holds such systems together is belief. As long as participants trust that prices will continue to rise, contracts remain liquid. As long as liquidity persists, value appears real. But belief is not a resource that compounds like land, labor, or capital equipment. It is sensitive to interruption. When confidence weakens, circulation slows. When circulation slows, prices lose reference points. When reference points vanish, value collapses back toward use. This process does not require panic. Withdrawal is enough. The Dutch tulip market did not end with widespread ruin. The broader economy survived, trade resumed, institutions endured. But the episode left a permanent imprint on financial thinking. It demonstrated that speculation was not an anomaly, but a phase, one that emerges when capital outpaces structure. That lesson did not prevent future cycles. It explained them. Modern systems repeat the same pattern under different conditions. The assets change, the instruments evolve, the scale increases. But the underlying logic remains intact. When returns from production narrow, capital moves toward abstraction. When abstraction dominates, risk accumulates invisibly. This is why bubbles rarely feel dangerous while they form. They are built on stability, not chaos. On trust, not fear. On systems that have worked well long enough to justify confidence. The danger lies not in excess emotion, but in misalignment between price and structure. Eventually, alignment is restored. Sometimes gradually through stagnation and slow repricing. Sometimes abruptly through liquidity shocks. The method varies. The outcome does not. Value reconnects with production. Claims reconnect with capacity. Tulips were an early demonstration of this reversion. They showed that even the most sophisticated systems cannot suspend economic gravity indefinitely. Finance can extend time. It cannot replace structure forever. This is why the tulip boom continues to matter, not because it was dramatic, because it was ordinary. It occurred in a successful economy. It involved trusted institutions. It unfolded quietly, and it resolved without destroying the system that produced it. That is precisely what makes it relevant today. The lesson is not that speculation should be eliminated. It is that speculation reveals limits. When value drifts too far from creation, correction is not a moral judgment. It is a structural response. Systems rebalance not because they must punish excess, but because they must function. The Dutch did not fail because of tulips. They exposed what happens when success changes incentives. And once incentives change, behavior follows until structure reasserts itself. History has the answers. I'll show you where to look.